Hello there, and welcome to the fifth episode of Dev Conversations by SwiftToolkit.dev. For this episode today we have Mikaela Caron. She's an independent iOS developer. She's also the co-host of the SwiftOver Coffee podcast and a freelancer. Hi Mikaela, how are you?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thanks for joining.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Sure. So the first time I heard of you was when I saw a talk that you presented that was the server-side Swift conference, right?
Yeah.
About Vapor and Fly. So I have a special place for server-side Swift in my heart, and I really like the subject. You come from a background of iOS development, right?
Technically, no, I don't actually. I
Oh.
studied mechanical and electrical engineering in college, and then
wow.
I didn't get into iOS until like 2 years later or so after graduating.
And you learned, so it was already Swift.
Yes, yeah. So I did Swift, and I was learning in like 2019 or so. So it was like the year SwiftUI was announced, but I remember everybody was like, everyone was struggling with the very first version of SwiftUI because if everyone doesn't remember, it was kind of a struggle on top of some things didn't work and a lot of things didn't exist yet. So because of that, I didn't want to jump into SwiftUI and like confuse myself when I was like kind of still learning. Plus, like it was buggy and everything. And so like you're trying to do something and you kind of can't tell, is this a SwiftUI bug or is this me not knowing how to write code?
Am I holding it wrong?
Yeah, exactly. So because of that, I learned like UIKit and everything for basically like another 2 years and then didn't get into SwiftUI until like the third version or so.
But how was learning Swift itself? And as someone who learned by yourself, what tips would you give to people interested in?
Yeah, I learned Swift and SwiftUI and like iOS dev. I did all of that in 2019 and I started with Code with Chris tutorials because I liked how he broke everything down and really like just explained everything. So it's like, what is the left side of Xcode? Where are all the files? Like explaining something like to that degree that nowadays, like you don't even think to point that out to somebody. But like if somebody's never seen Xcode, like they don't even know what's happening or like what all the different buttons are. So I had learned, using Code with Chris tutorials. And then I really liked at the time Sean Allen's tutorials that he had, and his YouTube channel is still like amazing. So because of that, a lot of it was like self-taught with like courses like in that way. But then I would say a tip for beginners and something that I kind of did, I don't know like where I got the idea from, but I had basically gotten on Code with Chris's forum that he had, which originally I think was a Facebook group. Now he has like a discourse forum, which is the same service that the Swift programming language uses.
The forums.
Yeah. I was in like a forum and it's all like for beginners, and I don't know why, but I just went through and answered everybody's questions. Like if somebody had a question, I would just go in there, attempt to answer the question or be like, oh, hey, can you explain how to do this? Or like, oh, here's a link, like maybe this will help or something. I don't know what it is. And I would just try to answer everybody's question because like learning how to code is one thing and like writing your own. But really, if you can also read other people's code, that's not something that you get, like, unless you try or unless you, like, are a part of some kind of community. So because of that, like, learning how to read other people's code was actually, like, super important. It really helped me with learning iOS dev.
Amazing. How did you transition to the server-side Swift from there?
I think it was one of my coworkers at one of my jobs. He was interested in Vapor, and I remember this was right before async await was released like in the Swift programming language, because I was writing a like Vapor API to do like one endpoint basically, and like that's sort of where I like learned all of that from. And then I had to do something, and then I had to flat map it, and then throw something else, something like that. And so he was like, "Oh, just wait, like give it 3 more months, and then we have async await, and that would come out."
Yeah.
He's like, "Ooh, now you got to do like 3 closures like back to back to back," and he's like, just give it a second though, we're about to have async await. So that's like where I heard of Vapor at first, and then like got into what is like actually Swift as a programming language and how it evolves and everything.
And what were the lessons you learned from this journey into server side?
It's been really fun, and like just to see how we can use Swift in other like ways, just because I always thought of Swift, it's just the language to do iOS development, iPad. Vision wasn't even a thing at this point yet, but like it's all an Apple platform kind of language. So really seeing that you can use server-side Swift in other ways, and just like how we can now use it on the server, on Linux, you can do it on Windows and like embedded. Seeing like all the different ways you can now just use this language is just really cool to see. Even though I haven't done all of them yet, I think that would be fun to just like at least try to use Swift on like every platform.
Yeah, but what bumps did you face?
Let's see. Learning Vapor, I think the hardest thing I've still had to do is attempt to figure out authentication. How do you sign in a user for your app, keep them signed in, and then how they make requests like to the server? It's almost actually not even a server-side Swift issue. It's more of like a me and iOS dev issue of keeping the user logged in like on the app itself, because making the request that's protected, you just, add a bearer token or something, and then that is what you supply with the request, and it's pretty easy, and you can do that, and you just give back the right information. But making sure and like kind of asking a bunch of people, am I doing this? Is this the right way to do this? Like how I have it in the iOS app, how it's in the server, and just checking like, is this all good? And like, it's not gonna, expose a ton of vulnerabilities like to my users or anything. It's like knowing if I'm doing all of that stuff right is kind of like scary, I would say, like and trying to figure out how to do, especially because it's one of those things where it's different for every single application. So like when you try to Google something about it or just look it up, there's so many different scenarios for how you can do that. It's like almost overwhelming to figure out.
Yeah, that's true. And also there are two different concepts in the server, right? There's authentication and authorization.
Yeah.
And authentication means you are the person you are claiming to be, and authorization means, is this user authorized to do so? These are concepts that they're not specific to Swift, but if you are not a backend developer, you might not be familiar with them. But any specific Swift issues or ecosystem issues?
I haven't faced it yet, but I know it's an issue. Sometimes you'll write some kind of code, and a lot of times we'll develop something on macOS, but then deploy on Linux. So something that you write may only be available on macOS, and it's not available on Linux. I haven't written anything yet that does that, or actually a better question is I have it deployed.
I think that this is less and less common because more recently the gaps have been filled by either if it's Foundation, or sometimes though there's still Foundation and Foundation networking, because on iOS URL session is part of Foundation, but on Linux it's part of Foundation networking. That's why it's interesting to use the async HTTP client package that takes care of all of that. And regarding server-side Swift development, in the more broad perspective or more related to generic bumps and difficulties, what did you face?
Yes, I had this, and I talked about this at the server-side Swift conference this year, in 2024. Just how hard it was to save a file to the server and like actually save data, basically something that's not just like text that's going in the database. And that was like my entire talk of how difficult that was. And I still actually haven't figured it out yet. Like I haven't gone back and attempted to write that code because I was attempting to save a photo. And in the Codeco book on Vapor, which I think is Vapor 3 or so, or it's Vapor 4, but it's not updated to like current today. It was like, I think a year or so old. And with that, it says like in the book, it had a whole chapter of, oh, this is how you save a photo for a profile picture. And I'm like, that's exactly what I need. And then in the book, it was like, save it on disk. But actually, in reality, that's not what you'll end up using like in real life. And I was like, oh, I need the in real life example, and trying to figure out all the hoops to get to that point. Because I am right now deploying my backend for my own personal app. I'm deploying it on Heroku. And because of that, you cannot just save files to the server, because every time like you push a new build, it'll go to a different server. So nothing is saved.
Yeah,
so because of that,
goes away.
Yeah, exactly. And because of that, I then have to save like in S3 or something else. I chose S3 because Heroku has like what they call add-ons to like just different things you can tack onto your app. It makes the S3 instance for you and manages it. I did that, but then now you have to like have all the proper permissions to be able to save, and then you also have to know how to properly communicate to S3 to give it that information. And that's like the whole part I'm still trying to figure out. And there's not as many examples how to do that in Swift. So because of that, it was like really difficult to like figure out what the full flow is supposed to be and how it all like works.
Yeah, I get it. Yeah. Developing for server, even though we have now a language and a framework, we might not have the experience and the way of thinking that we are used on in the same way that web developers make assumptions that are not valid for mobile.
Yeah,
we also
exactly.
now make assumptions that they are not valid for the server.
On the bright side, though, Sebastian Stormack had seen like my talk at Server Side Swift, and he did some AWS documentation on how to do what I was attempting to do. So on the bright side, like there is documentation now in Swift, I believe, for how to do that and like the process of what you have to do. So if anybody goes looking for it, they can now find.
Yeah, I see. And still on this subject of server-side Swift, I follow you on over social media, and I see that you are developing in public an app for sharing contacts in conferences, right?
Yeah.
And you chose Vapor. Why didn't you choose, for example, Node.js or Rust or Go?
So for this, I chose Vapor mainly because I've just been doing iOS stuff for a while, and I know that you can do server-side Swift. And it was funny, and I've even given a tutorial series on YouTube on Vapor, but I still never had my own backend that I had like actually deployed. So I kind of wanted to do server-side Swift, so then I can say I've actually done it myself rather than just like tell somebody in theory this is how it should work, but still never actually doing it. So it's like kind of imposter sort of syndrome. So
makes sense.
I can deploy now myself and say, oh, I've done it, and then see all the different errors and stuff that I've run into, and then I can post about that on social media, but then also hoping to like share that on like my own blog and stuff like that.
And help other people in the future not to face these errors.
Yeah, exactly.
And tell me a little bit more about where did you deploy your server and what else did you learn along the way in this process?
Yeah, so I'm making my own iOS app called Fruitful for, connecting with people at conferences. You just end up talking to so many people, it's hard to remember everybody you talk to and then who you meet. So it's an app to like remember those people. So then you can exchange a Pokemon card basically with the other person of like all their information. So it's like a business card, but a little bit like more fun. And with that, I wrote the iOS app in SwiftUI. And because I haven't released it yet, I had planned on doing that way earlier this year. And then now it's December and I still haven't released it. But on the bright side, because of that, I'm going to make it like minimum version is iOS 18. So then I can use all the new APIs and I don't even have to like backport it to iOS 17 or before because it's never been released. So it's kind of okay. And then I did the backend in Vapor for this. And then I didn't hear of Hummingbird, I don't think, until like after I had started the project. Otherwise, I may have wanted to like try to do it in Hummingbird instead. Maybe I'll still do something like that for fun one day. But I did Vapor for this and decided to then host it on Heroku because for me, I thought it was kind of easier, even though it's kind of funny. I've given a talk on deploying to a different platform, like on Fly.io. Between the two, then having done them, I thought Heroku was kind of easier. And because it's a bigger company, it has been around longer, it has more support on like just different topics, even if it's not the same thing in like, it's in a different language, like in Node.js or something. If I'm trying to do like a very similar thing, I might still find like good information about it.
Yeah, and it has a marketplace where you can choose. It's probably a larger one.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and when you say building in public, what does it mean in practice?
For me, a lot of it is just sharing like what I'm currently working on about it. I think the main base of the app, it was all I wanted to do sign in with Apple. And I swear, like half of this project, I've been debugging sign in with Apple just because I don't know how it works very well, or I'm like not doing something correct. And then handling it correctly on the iOS side, which is really a single call, but then taking that onto the server side and making sure I'm actually doing it all correctly. That has been like a huge challenge. So it's kind of sharing like what challenges I'm running into and kind of like tweeting about like my problems of what's happening. Because for all of this, really, you're never usually the first person to ever hit some issue unless you're, day one after dub, like, you're playing with a new API that was just announced. You're not going to be the very first one to do anything. So like being able to say and like talk about it hey, I don't know what I'm doing, and like show that on social media, for one, the internet will always correct you if you're incorrect. Like, you have no worries
For
about
sure.
that. So because of
Yeah.
that, the internet will always correct you. But also, there are so many nice people that are like willing to help you and be like, oh, hey, I did this recently. I can show you how to do something. And that's like super helpful and really like welcoming as well.
You said that the internet will always correct you, even if you are correct. That's
Yeah.
important to note. But when you are not, where do you go besides like posting on social media?
Uh,
If like people want to get help, what do you think are good places to go?
I think it depends on what you're looking for help on sometimes. There's some like Slack communities here and there that people have made for iOS dev. You can post in those. So it's more of like somebody will have like a code help channel on something, or I'm in a different one where they have very specific channels of, do you need core data help? Do you need SwiftUI help? Or do you need server help? And then you can
Mhm.
kind of like post in those very specific channels. Because yeah, it's if you don't have many followers on social media, sometimes like nobody's going to end up seeing it. So then you have to go to different like different avenues. So there's also Discord channels. So there is a Discord for Vapor and Hummingbird, and both of those have been super helpful every time I've posted
Yes, that's
in
true.
either of
Me
them.
too. When I
I
had
get
issues with
like
them, like yeah, it's almost immediate.
yeah, and that's what I was gonna say too. I was like, it's almost like exact like immediate when I post something. I one time was on a live stream like on my YouTube channel. I at the time was making an expense tracker app, so super basic, like
Hmm.
everyone knows how those work. And I was having issues with something, and I posted in the Vapor Discord and then dropped a link to my YouTube channel that I was live like on the air with. And then this was before I knew Tim Condon,
And
but
someone
he was
jumped
the
in.
one. Yeah, he answered and then came into my live stream and like looked at the code and was like, "Oh, you need a dollar sign right here on this line." And that was like what I
The
had been
whole thing.
debugging for the
Yeah,
past hour.
and the compiler probably wasn't helpful.
Yeah, exactly. It was about like eager loading something when you make a foreign
Hmm.
key, primary key connection between things. And
Hmm.
he just like immediately somehow happened to like see it at the same time and came into my live stream. Because it's like he could have just answered on Discord,
Amazing.
but the fact that he came all the way to my live stream and then like answered it live there, I was like, out of all the people who could come into my live stream, one of the maintainers of Vapor coming and telling me how
Came
to
in.
fix my code would be like
Yeah,
a dream come true.
nice. Yeah, that's an advantage of being in these Discord groups. I'm also gonna leave a link for the Swift open source Slack, which
Oh,
also
yes.
has a lot of things about Swift metrics, Swift tracing, Swift logging, concurrency, AWS Lambda. So they have all different subjects. Also, I think I've seen content about embedded or like not so orthodox directions of Swift. And from building in public, you learned a lot of stuff, I assume. And you also do freelancing work. Are you able to bring all this knowledge from building in public into your freelance work?
Yeah, it's actually right now I have a really fun part of my freelance project. It's mostly been an iOS app, so it's just all Swift, and most of it is actually still UIKit, so I still go back and forth between the two, like every day basically. But a new feature that I'm working on, it has to do with AWS Lambda. So I'm like super excited to actually get into that because I will be like learning how to do that and deploying it within like a month. But then it's also I get to be paid to learn something, and I'm like that is
Yes,
the dream of like
that's
what
cool.
I've loved about software development
Yeah.
is I'm paid to learn how to do something that I haven't done before. And then I get to immediately use that like in the code base and then see it like live in production.
Amazing. Yeah, if you're already mentioning Lambda, I'm also gonna leave a link for the video we published last week with Andrew Barba, where I deploy a little application using the Hummingbird Lambda package. So if you're willing to learn Hummingbird also, you can take this opportunity as they have the Hummingbird Lambda package, which bridges between the Lambda input to what Hummingbird expects. So it's a very nice way to use Hummingbird and also easy to deploy to Lambda with Swift Cloud.
Ooh, I'll check that out because yeah, it's the deployment is the issue I've been running into because of like
Yeah.
you have to always configure everything properly and you if you're like one character off or one like letter off, it doesn't work.
Yes, that's one of the advantages of Swift Cloud. It takes care of you. No, you don't need to even to know about Docker files and everything. So it's very useful.
Ooh, I'll definitely check that out.
Yeah. All right. And if people want to know more about your work, learn more about what you do, where they can find you?
So I'm on all the social medias. I wouldn't recommend people do it, but I am on all of them. I have an account on everything. But just my name, MikaelaCaron.com/links. We'll put like how to spell my name in the show notes because it's hard.
Yeah.
But
I'll leave a link as well.
yeah, it's MikaelaCaron.com/links is just a link to all my social media. So you can follow me on whichever one you prefer.
And we also leave a link for the Swift Over Coffee podcast and also to your YouTube channel.
Yep. Yeah, that sounds great.
All right. So thank you so much for joining. Thanks so much for the insights you brought. And maybe we'll see you in another video in the future.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Bye-bye.